presentations that history interests in the county are doing over what we call History Days. There are events going on all over the county. We've also started what we call a heritage trail, and you can access that by looking at the QR code on the back of this brochure or an insert that's in the Pulse, and it identifies 27 different history sites that you can visit in Door County. So welcome all. Little housekeeping, where are you all from? Do you have homes in Egg Harbor? And you're visiting? Okay. And just out of curiosity, how did you hear about this? Okay. All right. I'm the president of the Egg Harbor Historical Society, and we're doing a collaborative program with the two societies, us and the Liberty Grove Historical Society, and we hope to do more of these because it's kind of fun. So for tonight's presentation, I'd like to introduce Jan Newport, who will introduce our speaker.
Hi, I am Jan Newport. I'm on the board of the Historical Society in Liberty Grove. When you're on your way to the Winding Road and you see that beautiful museum on your left, stop in and see us. We're going to be open every Thursday and every Saturday from 10 until 2 with guided tours. So if you're in the area or stopping up that part of the county, we hope that you'll stop by and see us. We are celebrating our 25th anniversary this season. So we're very happy to have that happening. We have a brand new sign that might help guide you into the property that will give a little bit of history about the property as well. We have 2 new exhibits that are going to be opening this season. A lot of you know about the Gus Klinke Garage as you're heading north. Across from the vault now, we have one of the cottages, one of the Klinke cottages that is actually opening up this season. And then we also have the Hansen Century Farmhouse, which will be open for exhibits this season as well. So we're very excited to have you if you would like to come on up and see us. We would like to thank the Egg Harbor Historical Society for your wonderful, generous hospitality in having us join you for this event this evening. I'm going to be introducing Trigvie, but I wanted you to know that he has books available that he will sign for you after the presentation. So make your way on up here afterwards. Trigvie Jensen. He is an author and photographer. That's him right there. And he is dedicated to preserving the history of an industry that once dominated the small towns and hamlets around Lake Michigan and Lake Superior. Commercial fishing was integral to many ports along the Lake Michigan shorelines, providing jobs and fresh fish to consumers. It was an important industry and a vital livelihood for the islanders of Trigvie's hometown, Washington Island. From 1850 to the late 20th century, commercial fishing employed nearly half of the island's people, boasting at one time 40 fisheries. By the late 1980s, commercial fishing and the fleet of gill net tugs dwindled substantially. Today, only 2 fisheries remain?
Well, just one on Washington Island.
There you go. Okay.
Jeff McDonald, I think he went fishing probably a decade ago. Yeah.
How about that? Both of Trigvie's great-grandparents are Oliver Bjornson. Bjornson. There we go. Thank you, Trigvie. And Harry Hagen were successful fishermen in their day. Trigvie found it vitally important to document not only the commercial fishermen from Washington Island, but also many of the fishermen from other Lake Michigan regions. The stories of men and women became an interesting topic, thus beginning a journey to preserve the oral histories of a waning industry. Trigvie's first book, Wooden Boats and Iron Men, History of Commercial Fishing in Northern Lake Michigan and Door County, delved into the history, evolution of boats and gear, and the rise and fall of commercial fishing. Through waves and gales come fishermen's tales is all about the stories that were shared with the author by commercial fishermen, and women. It is their story of a life out on the lake that was only sometimes shared amongst their peers. Now, he would like to share them with us. Please join me in welcoming Trigvie Jensen.
Can you guys hear me in the back? Sound system all right? All right. Good. Well, welcome. Beautiful crowd, beautiful building. What a fantastic facility. It's natural light. This is awesome. I didn't envision this. I thought it would be like a barn or a little shed, fish shed, you know? And happy summer solstice. Beginning of summer. This is great. So tonight, the heart and soul of the book is always the stories, right? That's my favorite when I was writing the books. Wooden Boats and Iron Men, by the way, tomorrow, 18 years old. My little baby, 2 pounds, 8 ounces, still is. It's grown a little bit, but yeah. That was 18 years ago. And actually, that's when it was published, but the writing, my first interview was my cousin Jake Ellison in Washington Island, October of 2001. So, you wonder, why write a book? I'm not an author, I'm not a writer, I enjoy history. But I was having coffee with my grandfather, this was back in '94, and I always was intrigued by the stories, you know. Growing up on the island, both my great-grandparents were commercial fishermen. As kids, we'd go to the fish sheds. So when they were back, reeling nets or whatever, stories, man. Stories are flowing, and what a wonderful thing, you know, that we've lost that art of storytelling. That's you don't have that oral history or that way of life where we would get together with grandparents, friends and family, and the stories were always part of the get-togethers. At least I don't have that luxury anymore. So I was talking to my grandpa, having coffee, and I said, Gramps, I think, wouldn't it be kind of neat just to go around to some of these old timers and record them and get their stories? And he said, you better do it quick, Sonny boy. He said, the story's going to go to the grave. So I thought about that, and I was only like, in my mid-20s at the time. But it was there. It was always in the back of my mind. And then one day I was out taking pictures out in Jackson Harbor. A little bit more about myself. I'm sorry, but I got a little carried away. But so currently I live in the city of De Vere. I'm a building inspector. I'm also on the board of directors at Heritage Hill State Historical Park. I do reenactments. I'm in 7 reenactment interpreter groups. We do Revolutionary War, French and Indian War, French fur trade, Highlander, and there's probably a few more that can't pick right now. But so we have like 12 events there. So I'm really into history. I want to preserve it. I want to bring it out of the shadows of lethargy and bring it to light. So that piqued my interest when I was about 30. I was out in Jackson Harbor. Jake Ellison was coming in. He was a commercial fisherman out in Jackson Harbor. So I took a picture, a series of photos of him coming in, and when he moored up to the dock, I sat with him for 2 hours, and he told me stories, and just like when I was a kid, and gave me the history of commercial fishing in a few hours. So I had what I say my epiphany. So now I know what I'm going to write about, and so that was that. Now I go, how do I write a book? So started out with just an interview with Jake. Later on that fall, we sat down for another 2-3 hours, and I had my tape recorder, and then from there it was just off and running. Get-togethers with fishing families. I would get what we call roundtable sessions going. My best memory was out at Nelson's Shed in Jackson Harbor. We did I thought maybe it was just going to be a 1 hour, 2 hour roundtable storytelling session. So we got 14 of the commercial fishermen up there. And unfortunately, half of them are passed away. This was 2000, what was that, 2007, I think we did this. But so that was just beyond my wildest dreams. The the stories just kept going till, I think it was 10 o'clock at night we finally got out of there. But I had enough stories recorded for like 2 books, you know? So I did this not only with the Washington Island fishermen, but Algoma. We got to get together with some of the old fishermen there, and Door County. And so through all these interviews and collections of photos, which when I did the interviews with the families, they would bring out their photo albums of their commercial fishery. So I'd get my camera and copy stand, and so I had enough. I think I ended up with 300 photos, you know, and over 200 hours of interviews. So now, yeah, so now I got, and I went to all these, you know, archives and museums. So I put a lot of hours in, you know. Excuse me, and so then I had all this information, and then I had to really buckle down, and start writing. So that took about 2 years. History books are always daunting. It's quite an endeavor because, you know, you have to cite everything and you hope your sources are correct. One thing about fishing stories, who cares if they're not too accurate? They're stories, right? They're tales. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold, but so thank you. So yeah, I remember 2003, bins of information, all this, all the tapes, the interviews, and I had to transcribe everything, and so 2007, June 21st, my book was born. Again, 2 pounds, 8 ounces. Beautiful thing. 2 years later, my second book was born. 16 years old now. So, and I'm working on a third one that I'm still in the gestation period, I guess you could say. Been working on that for, wow, 8 years. I mean, the manuscript's pretty well done. I got like 600 pages of manuscript. It's just, I gotta get through the citation, the indexing. I got like, Niles Weber, he calls me once a month. He goes, Trigvie, you got that book done yet? I said, Niles, no. I need a few more stories. He goes, well, I'm tapped out. I said, hell, make a few up. Who's gonna know that? They're stories, right? So yeah, unfortunately, you know, the interviews I did 6-7 years ago, there was like 5 more fishermen passed away. So they're alive in the books, which is great. So, like I said, the stories are the heart and soul of my books. That was the best part of the trip. My first book is a comprehensive history from 1840 all the way up to the fall of, you know, the rise and the fall of the fishery. And it just really gives you some insight to what these fishermen went through, you know. And there was 2 commercial fishermen, Cliff Winiger and Weber, would always say their saying was years ago they made wooden boats and iron men. Now they make wooden men and iron boats. So tough. I mean, I listened to the stories from my grandfather and Jake Ellison when they had to fish chubs, right? So they'd leave Washington Island at 3 in the morning. They'd get down to the docks, get the old Collenberg engines, you know, hit the glow torches. Took probably 7 minutes to get those things started. They'd make a 3-4 hour run out to the Manitou Islands, the Geiken Reef, and that's where the chub grounds were. And they did this throughout the winter, spring, summer, fall. That's when the whitefish were starting to decline back in the 60s. So for 15, 20 years, when the whitefish were in decline, they made that run every day, or 3 days a week anyway, out to the Geiken Reef, then 4 hours back, you know, plus you have an hour out there setting or lifting and setting back. And then, you know, some days were uneventful, but most of the days, especially in the fall, September, October, it was blowing. And all they had back in the, you know, turn of the 20th century, there was no GPS, there was no Loran that came about in the 50s. They had a clock, they had a compass, and they had a sounding lead, usually a window weight for depth, and a logbook. Those fishermen knew, and it was just amazing. Like Jake Ellison said, the 2 commercial fishermen that were always spot on. They could go 6 hours with clock and compass and find a net buoy in all kinds of weather, just by setting course, knowing the currents, knowing the winds. So, and you know, and I talked to so many fishermen about this, and they said, yeah, you can't rely on just a brief introduction. You guys still hear me all right in the back? Okay. So all the stories, the bulk of the through Ways and Deals Come Fisherman Tales are probably about 140, 150 stories in here. So I'm just gonna select a few, otherwise we'd be here till 2 in the morning. But they're all great stories. I wish, you know, my other book, hopefully it comes out soon, it has about 200 stories. And then that's the last, and then that's the last of the series. It'll be titled Breakers Across the Bow, because there isn't too many fishermen left anymore. Door County at the turn of the 20th century boasted over 400 commercial fishermen, farmers and fishermen. Now we're down to less than 4. You got Charlie Henriksen and Hickey Brothers. I don't know if Jensens are still fishing, or not, Voigts, I mean. That I don't know, I've kind of lost touch with a few of the fishermen. Like I said, my interest, I always move on to other things, so, but my passion has always been the history of commercial fishing and maritime history. So it covers the fishermen of Door County, Washington Island, Lake Superior, different parts of Lake Huron, so I didn't want to disclude any of them. So, this I found, one of the fishermen, I think it was Peterson sent me this, and I thought I'd read it. It's going to be in my second book, but it's a really good story, and I thought I'd read it. I'm going to read a couple stories, and then I'm going to kind of segue into this one. It's called Chubbing in a Big Blow, meaning fishing chubs. Not too many chubs left in the lake. At one time there were 7 species of chubs. Right now there's just the bloater chub, and they're almost extirpated out of the lake. So a brief introduction is commercial fishing is one of the oldest professions known to man, in which the industry has survived for nearly 200 years on the Great Lakes. Commercial fishermen are the living past, confronting an uncertain future. They epitomize the American dream, independent, ambitious, and hardworking. Not only are they fishermen, they are carpenters, navigators, electricians, welders, among other things. As one commercial fisherman so eloquently stated, we don't know how to do anything well, but we can do everything. Many commercial fishermen are born into the business, passed down from generation to generation. At a young age, they helped out with shore duties, eventually accompanying their fathers on the boats, learning the craft firsthand, assimilating into a way of life that proved to challenge one's physical and mental strength. It's not the easiest life, but it's the only life as far as I'm concerned, said one venerable commercial fisherman. And I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit, get rid of some of this fat here. Commercial fishermen in the Great Lakes were still and are a tough bunch by any measure of the word, especially the fishermen of the early days. Marvin Weberg and Cliff Winnegar, 2 prominent fishermen in their own right, were known to say, years ago they made iron men and wooden boats. Now they make iron boats and wooden men. So I always thought that was kind of cool. I thought it was a great name for a book. So that's what I titled my book, my first book. Being constantly exposed to the elements, fishing is rough, hard work. The day begins very early and usually carries fishermen well into the evening, depending on the season, weather, and what type of fishing they are performing. For the most part, it is a long day that involves physical labor under all kinds of conditions, varying from sunny days to late fall storms and heavy seas, a true test to a fisherman's endurance. In addition, a certain skill factor and a little luck plays an integral part. As one commercial fisherman, Elvin Gabby Anderson, now that guy can talk, hence the name Gabby. I mean, I went down to Milwaukee and we sat in his car. Of course, he had a thermos full of martinis. It was like 10 in the morning, and I don't think I got out of there till 4 in the afternoon. Of course, he had all his sails set, you know, so he was riding pretty high in his martinis. And those stories were wonderful stories. I'm glad I got a lot of them in the third book I'm working on, but some are in here, which I'll read to you. But Elvin Gabby Anderson, a commercial fisherman, talks about the wealth of knowledge and experience that is needed to be a commercial fisherman. A true commercial fisherman has more knowledge. I don't care how much education you have. If you have 2 years, 4 years, or 8 years, it takes common sense and knowledge of all that's around you. You've got to understand in this business, you can't be taught this in books. It's all experience, and you have to know what's happening all the time in order to understand it. In the old days, all we had was a clock and a compass. I had an old alarm clock. There were no fathom meters, radios, navigational aids, or sonar. You'd run into snowstorms, fog, or what have you, and you had to know where you were by what you knew and what knowledge you gained through experience. I don't care if you've been out there for 5 years or 35 years, you see something different every time you go out. You keep learning, always learning. There's always something different, but you learn and you don't forget. You store that in your mind, which gives you experience. So when a situation arises, you can say, I need another martini. No, I've seen this, I've been through this, and I know what to do. A good captain observes everything, and you learn from your experiences. And you are never too old to learn. I've been out there 52 years, and I don't think there was hardly ever a day I haven't seen something or learned something new. It's unbelievable what you can learn. So, get on to the stories, man. First one, this is a little kind of a history that Marvin Weber put together. Kind of sums up his career in the life of a fisherman. Excuse me. It's not the easiest life, but it's the only life as far as I'm concerned. It's all I've ever done. I fished probably 50 or 65 years at least. With what kind of boats we've had, I fished gill net boats, pond nets, trap nets, hooks, hook and line, herring nets, floating herring nets, pond nets for herring, and all the rest of it. I've had a good life as far as fishing is concerned. We've caught an awful lot of fish. I've enjoyed it, the fresh air. I've never been afraid to be out on the water and in the winds. You might as well stay out there once you're out there because winds are just as bad going in. The times you get the worst ride are going out or coming in. When you're traveling any speed, as far as the lifting is concerned, we've had waves take and throw our roller back into the boat, throw our nets in and boxes, I'll scatter them all over the place, and the water land right in front of the lift door on the other side of the boat. We put it all back together and keep on lifting. I'd say sometimes the nets have snapped right off, and we had to go to the other end and grapple them. Of course, on an occasion like that, you don't stay out there anymore, you head for home. And the next story is going to be, excuse me, out fishing in some bad weather. We got waves that are 15, 30 feet tall. No exaggeration. They said they're just mountains. So, this is two fishermen out of Sheboygan. Their grandfather actually fished in Sturgeon Bay, Leonard Nelson. And they ended up buying, it was Mark Nelson, bought his grandfather's boat, and then they moved their operation to Sheboygan. So they've been fishing there, and I think they're still fishing today. Mark Nelson, a third-generation fisherman from Sheboygan, grew up around commercial fishing. He began his fishing with his grandfather, Leonard Nelson, on the gill net tug J.B. Nelson. After his grandfather passed away, Mark took over the fishery, carrying on the legacy that continues. Excuse me. He said the ugliest he encountered was on a day they were pressed to get a lift on a gang of chub nets some 15 miles out of their normal chub grounds. It was a nasty day, but just another day nonetheless, Mark recalled. And he said there was one time we were fishing chubs in the J.B. Nelson off Sheboygan, 3 hours out in a real bad southerly blow. The only reason we were out that day, and it was nasty, we should not have been out there, but it was my deckhand. His dad had passed away, and the funeral was the next day. The fish were so heavy at the time, and we had the nets out there for a few days because you didn't want to leave your nets out more than a week. Back in the day, you could leave them out for a couple weeks depending on the water temperature, but with the DNR new regulations, typically you had to get a lift out in 3 days. He said we left the dock around 4:30, and she was already blowing pretty well out of the southwest. But it wasn't too bad. Once we got out to our nets that were 13 miles out, then she really came through, but we made the lift. I remember that day well. We could actually hear that thing, the comber, they call Three Sisters, or the wave, the rogue wave, coming. It was at the lifter on the port side of the boat. Most gill net tugs on the west side of Lake Michigan have the lifter on the starboard side. And it put the JB Nelson right on her side, rolled it right over on its side. We were lifting, there was no one in the wheelhouse. We had everything flying around in there. Every net in the boat was flying and we were upside down. We had 1,000 pounds of chubs in the boat already and they were scattered all over the place. We were hit broadside with a heavy, fast-moving rogue wave. I had the lifter door open a crack and the whole thing was underwater, which kept pouring in a solid stream. So I'm thinking to myself, is this boat ever gonna right herself? It seemed like we were on our side for a long time. You know, we didn't see that comber coming, but you could hear it. They always say it's like a tornado. And the fisherman said, even over the din of the engine, these things scream and they make this moaning sound, these waves that are pushed along with the wind. I've never heard that, but I've had a number of fishermen say, yeah, it's almost a malevolent sound, you know. You know, we didn't see that comber coming, but you could hear it. It came roaring in. It sounded like a freight train. Then, bam! It hit the side of the boat so hard, flopping her on the side. We had the pumps running for nearly half an hour to get the water out of the boat. The pumps run off the engine, which is supposed to pump 63 gallons a minute. That tells you how much water came in. I had two guys with me that day. One guy had to pull all the nets back in the box, and the other guy was trying the best he could to pick the fish up and put them back in the bins. It was a mess. We had 3 boxes to lift yet. After we were hit, we finished lifting, then set back before coming home. So, oh well, we're out here, you might as well, the boat went back, righted itself. Might as well get the nets set back. This is another one by Mark Nelson. They've hit some pretty heavy seas out there by the Sheboygan Reef. This is another one Mark Nelson recalled another time when he and his brother Eric were out fishing chubs 20 miles off of Sheboygan on a cold northwesterly blow. It was a few days before Christmas, 1986, and they gave an early gift to fellow fishermen, Glenn Sager and his crew, who were stranded dead in the water in Glenn's gillnet tug Islander. This story is told by Mark Nelson and Glenn Sager. So Glenn actually bought the Islander that was owned by the Weavers for many years up in Gills Rock. The Islander is still there in Sheboygan. It's part of a living museum. They restored it, and that boat was, I believe, was built in 1930. And so this is to the rescue. There was a time we were out fishing chubs and we ended up towing in Glenn Sager and his crew in the gillnet tug Islander. We received a call from Glenn that he broke down and was dead in the water. It was one of those nasty days out on Lake Michigan. At the Coast Guard station in Sheboygan, they were clocking over 40 miles per hour out of the northwest. There you hardly notice it, but out on the lake, about 20 miles, you felt it. We had 3 boxes of nets lifted when we got the call. We were contemplating whether to buoy off and head back home prior to Glenn's call. It didn't bother me any to get off those nets, so we buoyed off and headed to where they said they were. Well, we finally got to them. They had drifted 3 or 4 miles already. It took us almost 3 hours to get a line to them. And when he was, I could just see it, the imagery when he was telling me this, you know, and he said the 2 boats were, you know, bouncing on these waves that were 25 feet, you know, so they couldn't get the line to one another. It took 3 hours. So he goes on to say, the wind kept blowing, which made it more difficult. It was nasty, that wind, and below 0 temperatures. I don't know how big the seas were, maybe 15, 20 feet. With those big seas, you could hardly get close enough to throw the line. One of Glenn's crew members had to get up on the roof of the Islander to try to catch the line. There was no way in hell anyone should have been out there on the roof in those conditions. He sprawled out on the top of the Islander with a line tied around his waist, so he was on top of the, you know, deck of the boat with these malicious seas. we finally got close enough, actually too close, we damn near hit him. It was a northwest wind and she was really blowing. We should have never been really out there that day, as I say it again. Trying to throw that line out of the stern of the JB Nelson was almost impossible. I remember Eric was trying to get the line to the guy on top of the Islander. Finally the guy, he wasn't even looking, he was just trying to keep from being washed overboard. As we got close enough, and Eric hollered, "Grab it, here it comes." He just about handed it to him, but it blew back, the wind blew it back. They tried throwing a buoy line with grappling hooks, but we couldn't. We'd lose the boat in between the seas. We couldn't see the Islander anymore, the seas were so big. We'd be down in the trough, and then all the steam, because of the cold air temperature, made it all that more difficult to see them. So not only did you have the waves, you had the freezing spray, and then you had the steam or the fog that was created. When we finally got them the line, a 1-inch nylon line, then we tied her off in the stern and began towing them back. Well, on the way back in, we were quartering into the seas, which you always do in rough weather, and we went up on a big sea, and the boat became airborne, and then we drop off the wave and come down hard. It smashed all the floorboards on the deck. It blew out every floorboard we had in that down below it when it came down, and it just slammed. It was like they thought the boat was just going to fall apart. We couldn't run the engine at full speed. We had to check her down. The seas were so big when we'd go up on it, the drag from the Islander would almost stop us. Then we would be airborne again and then drop like a rock into the trough of the wave or the sea. The decks were all blown out. It was a mess. As soon as we started heading in, we began making ice fast. When they say making ice, that means the spray from the waves is freezing on the boat, on the tugs, on these gillnet tugs, and you can get 4 to 5 inches of ice, and it becomes almost a coffin because the boat becomes so unstable that fishermen would just roll over and sink, you know. And fishermen told me, you know when that's happening because you can feel the boat, it doesn't respond, gets very sluggish. Then you either bend down and start puckering up or saying prayers. But as we started heading in, we began making ice fast. When we came down off the sea, the spray would just fly, and that's when we made the ice on the boat. The Islander was making ice too, but not as bad as we were on the JB Nelson. It took us nearly 4 hours to get back into the pier. Glenn finally got the engine going about 3/4 of the way back. We cut the line, and we made it back, and he made it back on his own. There are days like that, you know. What do you have to do? I mean, we have to go out and get a lift on the net. Something that we're crazy to do that. But there's no doubt when someone's in trouble, like the day we were out there, you have to help your fellow fishermen. If we hadn't been out there that day, he would have drifted across the lake to the other shore. So, and then I found this story. It's pretty similar to talking about how the boat responds when they become airborne and slam down on a wave. And this is called chubbing in a big blow. He goes, I've been in a number of big blows that were equally brutal. Normally, you get caught in them. Most sane men wouldn't deliberately set out to get their nets and storm with the forced winds like that. It just makes simple jobs on the boat 5 times harder. You have to constantly try to keep your balance on a violently shifting floor. Things fly around in the boat, and it's just dangerous. Not to mention it's hard on your nets lifting in huge seas. However, at some point you may well be caught in one best decision. I remember one that was the kind that sinks ships. We were roughly 12 miles out of Bailey's Harbor, Wisconsin. The year was 1986 or 1987. It was winter chub fishing, so the days are short. With the added times it takes to break ice to get to open water, we'd be accustomed to running back to the dock in darkness. So, long day, dawn to dusk. We were an hour or so from finishing up and heading in when the wind started to blow. It kept increasing, and we had no way of knowing how bad it would be, or how bad it would get. Eventually it got to where it was whistling in places you never heard before. There was a tiny crack in the door next to me, and it was whistling an angry tune. It is a surreal feeling when you hear that wind that sounds like an approaching train, even audible with the diesel running. I'm not even sure that you hear it so much as you feel it. It creates a chorus of whistling sounds anywhere wind can enter. The high pitch of these whistles cuts right through the hum of the boat. If you know a fisherman who claims to have been in a storm or hurricane-force winds, he will likely mention the sound of a train and the whistles, ghostly whistles. Excuse me. We finished and headed back to shore. It was slightly over an hour run in normal conditions. By this time, the wind was beyond anything I had been in, and I could only estimate it was somewhere between 55 and 70 miles per hour. That's hurricane force, a heavy gale. I think the weather report the next day said it was around 60 with gusts up to 70 miles per hour. But that was not an open water. That was not an open water observation. It would have been more out on the water. We knew we weren't going to be dressing the chubs on the ride in, so my dad said, find a good place to hang on, and I gladly did. He started into running about 2/3 throttle. After the boat took a slam that literally sent shivering vibrations through the entire hull, he pulled back on the speed a little bit, and they call that cutting her down. It's a feeling of unease when half of the boat free falls off of a wave and does a belly flop back on the water. That's the slam that causes the hull to shake or even crack. The wave passing under the boat leaves the front half out of the water, and then it drops at free fall full speed down into the trough and creates the same effect as a belly flop. We carried on after a second free fall, and he checked it down some more. I was bracing myself by the stove, and the winds blowing over the top of the stovepipe were drawing so much air that out those little breather vents in the stove door were whistling, and the fire was being drafted so much that the stove was like glowing red hot. So that's another element. You got a burning hot glowing stove with all that fuel oil, and that's have been fires and explosions on boats because of that, because that wind, drafting down the stovepipe. Then I noticed something. The whistling had stopped. That could mean only one thing that I could think of. We're icing over. In freezing conditions like this, the fear of accumulating a buildup of ice on your boat and changing the center of gravity is always present. When a certain amount of fresh or flash freezing ice accumulates, the vessel will not recover from a roll and pitch of the waves, and you'll roll right over. So it was dark, and I can't tell you how high the waves were. I think I'm glad I couldn't see them. At that time, I really didn't need the visuals to add to this hellish drama. I can tell you the water comes into your boat in so many places you'd never think of. It comes in around the portals, around every door. It comes in from other places I probably didn't see. It comes in until, as I said earlier, you begin to ice over. In a winter storm, the very boat you trust to bring you home safely acts like your best friend 1 second and like it wants to kill you the next. It could be your savior or your coffin. It was a long run back in. It probably took over 2 hours. Everything in the boat that wasn't tied down had to be relocated, and he goes on saying, they did catch 2,500 pounds of chubs that day, so, but they made it. P.S. My writing could use some editing and punctuation. Feel free to use the story as you see fit in the next book. So, any questions? Yes?
No, actually, you never see chubs on a menu.
No.
What is that used?
Chubs, they're only good smoked. So, get a box of crackers, start peeling the chubs. It's a oily fish. It's a Cisco. It's related to the whitefish, except it has a little bit more oil to it.
Do they sell like cat food? Why do they catch all of these?
Cats love it. So the chubs have always been kind of like a delicacy. If you got to smoke them, well, to a lot of people. It's like where I grew up, whitefish livers. That's our delicacy, deep fried whitefish livers. Best thing under the sun, or the moon. But yeah, chubs, There's a certain market. If you're in the Door County or from the, around the Great Lakes, you can get smoked chubs. Now, the chubs are less prevalent because of the food that they feed on. The invasive mussels that came in, the quagga and the zebra mussels, well, they compete with that same, it's called Ponpori shrimp. And so the mussels have pretty much taken all the food source from the chubs, and like anything in the Great Lakes, in the last 120 years, there's been 130 invasive species. Most of our native species are gone, like the native lake trout. We had a robust herring fishery at one time. They were gone by 62. The native lake trout were decimated by the sea lamprey, which came into the Great Lakes during the 30s. They came in through the St. Lawrence Seaway. It's an ocean parasite. And they made their way into Lake Erie, Lake Ontario. When they got to Lake Huron and Lake Michigan in the 1930s, they exploded. For whatever reason, they just proliferated. And in a mere 25 years, they wiped out most of the whitefish and the native lake trout. By 1954, the native lake trout were gone, and they tried restocking the lake trout, but they weren't getting the breeding, the spawning. So they instantly took those off the commercial fishing list, and the whitefish and perch and other chubs were affected by all the non-native species coming in. So by the 1980s, we went from 5,000 fisheries on Lake Michigan down to maybe a couple hundred, maybe 300. And then the DNR formulated, it was the Conservation Commission, but then it started as the DNR in 1966. Well, they favor the sport fishery. So they planted salmon in the lake. So they really, in essence, put the proverbial noose around the commercial fishermen with quotas, limited entry. In 30 years, they were gone. So you're losing the fish stock and of course, the commercial fishermen. So chubs. You ever try a chub? Oh, they're so good. Oh, my wife doesn't either. She won't let me have them in the house. So I have to go eat them out in the shed. I haven't seen them. She won't let me come in unless
I got to know how big whitefish liver is.
they can bump like this. Yeah, like a chicken nugget.
So how many whitefish you have to catch to eat and have a meal of livers? Like chicken.
Well, yeah, like chicken. Yeah, you need quite a few. But being my grandparents were commercial fishermen, we've always had enough fish. I can't eat fish anymore. I grew up eating fish. I mean, a fish boil. Now, you know how a fish boil started, right? You guys know the history of that. It was from the commercial fishermen, because they always had a kettle on their stove. They'd always bring onions and potatoes, and they have salt. Usually it was rock salt. And then usually if they got hungry, they'd take one of the fish off the lifter, skin it, or chunk it, and throw it in the boiling water. And of course, they didn't do the boil over in the boats, but that's a little dangerous. Or they call them domers. They take newspaper, wet it, and they put the fish in there, and they put onions and little potatoes and a lot of salt, and they roll it up. And then they put it on the stove and turn it over every once in a while. And then half hour, maybe 20 minutes, they peel that newspaper off and then take the skin off. And you would have that beautiful, you put a lot of butter on it. You have that great delicacy. Or they just take the livers right out and pop it in the mouth. No, I'm just kidding. They didn't do that. So anyway, I'm gonna jump back and forth. I'm gonna do, I got a good story here by Elaine Johnson. So that was one of my favorite interviews, Elaine and Gretna. Man, I would go there and we'd have coffee, I had my tape recorder. I'm always glad I could grab extra tapes and batteries, because that was another one, like Gabby Anderson. You could, 4 or 5 hours with Elaine and not so much Gretna, but Elaine she was very loquacious, you know, she had a lot of stories. And I'm glad, because I got probably 40 hours of stories of interviews, so. This was a strange occurrence, she was telling me. Let me see if I can find it. When she was out, her and Gretna were out, they had a little, I think they're out for catching perch. Bear with me here. I tabbed it, but I should have put the name down. Okay, I'm getting close. Is there any other questions?
I'm gonna just ask if there were women fishermen, women.
Yes, yes. Yeah, there was Elaine Johnson and Gretna. There was also some of the Greenfelds. I think there was three, but I think they all helped in the business. Some were on the, not so much on the boats, but they were in the fish shed. I know on Washington Island during the herring runs in the fall, everyone helped out. The wives, the kids, and they would have to salt the herring and put them in barrels. So it was quite an operation. And then in November, that was the herring runs, because that's when they'd come in the spawns, and they would be setting pod nets and trap nets for them. And for that whole month, you know, they were busy.
Trigvie?
Yes.
I found a nice image of Elaine Gretna right
Ah,
here. And yesterday.
Yeah, I took that picture out by their shed.
Oh. And then we just had our Lake Table Fish Boil fundraiser.
Last
We do
night?
this every year, last night.
Yeah, well, they were wonderful. I miss, I think Elaine passed away 4 years ago, maybe, something like that, but every once in a while, I turned everything, all my files, I created on digital files now, so I just type in Elaine Johnson, and then I got all their interviews, so it's nice to go back and listen to the stories.
We have our oilers too, right? I mean, we have those in our barn, so you can actually see what she wore.
Oh, yeah, well, that's neat. Yes?
Just have a quick question. When the boat ices over, do they ship it out or try to throw it in the water? I mean,
The problem is they try, but it's so hard to open those doors, lifter doors, or the doors. A lot of them are sliding doors, and they're just all iced in. So you're kind of
you're kind of
encased.
stuck with the ice and you just have to make it fast.
Yeah, even the portal's iced up, so you're just going off of clock and compass. You know, sometimes they would run manifold heat up, and there would be a defroster there, where you'd have to try to bust the portal so you could see out. And I have several stories of that happening in here. One will be coming up. But I found a story. Elaine Johnson and her cousin Gretna Johns reside in their family home in Liberty Grove on the Door Peninsula. They will forever be known in the annals of Door County history as the Fisher Ladies. In their younger years, they had bought a few nets from a Washington Island fisherman, which they modified to suit their needs. With a little help from their Uncle Reuben and a good friend and partner, Robbie Cadunco. Oh my God, there's a whole nother book on this guy. You ever heard of the name Robbie Cadunco?
No.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he had a voice. Unfortunately, he passed away. I think he was in his 40s. He drowned setting nets, and he got tangled in the net in his boot and it pulled him under. Very unfortunate, but with a little help from our Uncle Reuben and a good friend and partner, Robbie Cadunco, they had found some success in fishing and peddling perch. It prompted them to start a business they called the Northern Lights Fish Company. Elaine tells the following story about a strange occurrence while they were fishing in the bay during an October blow. She stated, I set some big mesh before the season was closing. Our Uncle Reuben had a 5-horsepower Johnson engine mounted on Melvin Knutson 15-foot boat or skiff called the Pioneer. I set the big mesh out there in the bay near the sister islands. Then the wind started to blow, and it lasted for 3 days. Our Uncle Reuben said to us, Gretna and I, now you've got to get out and tend those nets. You got to get out and get a lift on them. I said to Reuben, God, there's white caps. She's just white out there. She's just foam. I can't go out there in that skiff. He said, you shouldn't have set the nets then. Well, he kept on us for a couple days, riding me every day to go out and get those gall darn nets. Finally, on the third day, I went to my cousin Dickie Bergman, and I told him what the deal was. I said, maybe we could try it. Maybe we can give it a try today. If it's too bad, we'll turn around. We got the damn Jensen, meaning the engine. That damn Jensen would never start. The gall damn thing, got her going, and it headed toward the sister islands. Melvin once told me, he said, if you get in trouble, quarter into the waves, you'll make it if you quarter into the waves. Well, there were walls of water all around us. When we got in the belly of the troughs, but don't you suppose we get out there, and I just had a piece of damn firewood for our net float or buoy because the season was closing and we didn't want the DNR to catch us. We came right out on that damn thing, and it was blowing like a bitch. Just crazy. The water was coming in so hard, Gretna and Dickie were only 2 feet away from me and I couldn't see them. It was blowing and raining so hard. It was a hell of a day. A 40-foot boat wouldn't even have been out there today. I always wonder if they exaggerate a little bit. But then, I don't think so. Because I went out with the Hickey brothers, chub fishing, and it was a northeast wind, 15-foot seas. I was sicker than a dog, man. I wanted them to take me home. Of course, they don't do that. So Elaine says, we got a hold of that chunk of wood, and when Dickie got a hold of the net, the wind just changed. Something happened. She goes, I don't know. Maybe the Lord was looking after our dumb butts. All of a sudden, she got still and the water just shook. It was strange. You couldn't believe it unless you were in the boat at that time. It was like something, I don't know what, but it was real crazy. Dickie pulled on those damn nets and we must have got at least 100 pounds of whitefish or whatever we got. For some reason, I don't know why, but I shut that damn Jensen motor off. I thought, uh-oh, I'll never get that bitch started. Sorry, it's verbatim. I don't want to lose any of the essence of it. I gave her one pull and away she went. How do you like that? We finally made it back to the Sequest dock and all hell broke loose. She turned ugly again. Now talk about a couple of gall-dang goofball kids. Why in the hell we didn't drown is beyond me. The water out there at that time just shook, trembled, or quivered, like from big swells to nothing. I was so gall-darn scared, when I finally got on the beach, I got sick to my stomach. There was something more powerful than us out there that day. It was just one of those weird things. But like the waves just stopped for just a moment. Like the good Lord, when he calmed the sea, with his disciples when they were caught in that storm. I'm going to keep rolling with it. I got another Elaine story. No, I got to find it. It's back. I'll go to some humor. Oh, it's Robbie and the old life vest. So this is a story about Robbie Cadarco, told by Elaine. Let's see. One day, Robbie was combing the beach in Sister Bay and found one of those old Coast Guard life jackets. Cork in it, about this long. Jeez, he found that thing on the beach. God, he really thought he found something. So he went down to the lake by the old ice house just off the dock. Robbie stripped down to his shorts and put on that life jacket. Here he comes running with those big bull legs, full bore, out to the end of the dock and jumped way out there and plunked right to the bottom. I could see him out there struggling, I hollered to Melvin Knutson, he's in trouble, get the pike pole. We got to get him off the bottom. Oh yeah, said Melvin in his slow-drawn Norwegian accent. He's always fooling around. I said, he ain't fooling around. Get the goddamn pike pole. We got to get him out of there, Melvin. Melvin got the pike pole and Robbie grabbed it. Both Mel and I pulled as hard as we could, and Robbie came out of that water like a tuna. The vest was so waterlogged, it was like a lead around his belly, so down he went to the bottom. Gee, criminy, all he said. Gee, criminy, as the water was spurting from his mouth. What's the matter with you? Can't you help a feller? Gee, criminy, I could have drowned. Yeah, Melvin said, that's the trouble with you, Robbie. I never know when you're fooling around. So, yeah. God, there's a couple other ones that Elaine was telling me here. I gotta tell this one. I remember that boat, the Osprey. It had a gasoline engine to start it. Robbie, he'd get that old belt on her and try to get that old Collenberg to turn over. He'd tell me to get ready and squirt ether in the holes. The darn thing would never start. Robbie had a temper, and he'd grab a hammer from the side of the boat, bang that engine with the hammer, and throw it as far as he could. Sometimes it would bounce around, then land in the drink. The next day he'd go and buy another hammer. There must have been 40 hammers lying around somewhere on the bottom of the lake. He was a character. There was nobody like Robbie. So I'm going to just read another humorous story, and then I'll jump back into some of the storms and ice shuts. It's amazing. Even the ice. I remember Jake telling me that him and his brother Steve were out fishing off of Washington Island. It was in the wintertime, February. And they went out in the morning, but the winds shift and that ice field can move fast. So they were fishing. They got a clear run out through the Rock Island Passage. And they were out lifting probably 15 miles off Washington Island, off the east end, northeast end. And he said by the time we come back, the wind shifted. So from the north, it pushed all that ice back, to Washington Island, just a big ice shelf. So he said, here we come back, and then we just got miles and miles of ice field. And so he says, well, what do we do? So they ran 8 miles to the south to see that they could get in to the south end of Washington Island, but that ice field was packed in on the east end and the north end. So they went back up to St. Martin's, back down to Rock Island. Said we were just about ready to put the buoy out and stay there for the night. So he said, wouldn't you know it? He said that ice started moving, and it actually, this expansion crack opened up to about 10 feet wide for about 2 miles. And that's how far we had to get in. So Jake says to his brother Steve, well, do we take a chance? Because that ice can slam you shut too and pop you out of the water. So Steve said, well, it's either that or staying out here all night or till the wind blows the ice out. So they said, well, let's give her the coals, and they opened her up. And then Jake said that we were praying, but we had that Miss Judy wide open. We were slamming inside of that ice field. They just had that little channel. And he said, we just got into the Rock Island Passage, and it was kind of clear in there. And he said, 5 minutes later, that ice field just slammed right shut. So we would have been crushed or popped out of the water. So he said, we rolled the dice and got lucky. But there's type of fishing that see over river boats, which would be a good segue to Alvin Gabby Anderson's story, caught in a 3-day blow.
While
You guys,
while you're looking for that story, I just wanted
oh, that's a great picture.
let everybody know that I have a picture here of Elaine and Marvin Weber and Gretna cleaning fish. That's right over
Back
here.
in the heyday.
Yeah, and Elaine died in 2020.
Oh, 2020, okay. You know what, I haven't talked to her probably in 15 years, I miss her. I miss talking to the fishermen, I kind of moved on to, with writing my other book. My last interview was probably 6 years ago. Geez, I gotta get that book out, man. Let's see. Here we go. Caught in a nor'easter. Commercial fisherman Alvin Anderson could talk for hours about his experience and encounters out on the Great Lakes. He has seen just about everything in every condition imaginable in his 54 years of commercial fishing. In his younger days, there was not much that would keep him from going out to get a lift. His peers coined him Geronimo because of his brazen and unflappable demeanor. When it came to fishing, he was adamant on getting a lift on those nets no matter what Mother Nature threw at him. However, there was one experience that still wakes him up out of a sound sleep and is a reminder that he's lucky to still be alive to fish another day. The year was 1951. He and his brother Floyd were fishing lake trout in Lake Superior near the Apostle Islands. I remember telling me the story, and there was a couple times he broke down, and it was just such a life-shattering experience, because he thought they were in honors. So Elman told me this story. He goes, I was talking to my brother Floyd some time ago, and we got talking about the time we were both put to the test of endurance and seamanship. It was 52 years ago in 1951. My brother and I were caught in a heavy northeaster while we were fishing out of Port Wing, Wisconsin, up in Lake Superior. We had the boat, the RVH at the time. We had a Caterpillar diesel engine in her. It was around the time of the vernal equinox. I think it was the days of March 19th, 20th, and 21st. At that time, we were gone for a week fishing 40 miles from Port Wing. We left 2 harbors, Minnesota, in the spring of the year. We wintered in 2 harbors because we could get out of there earlier than Port Wing, because Port Wing, you could be stuck there half the spring with all the ice. We could go out for 4 or 5 days, then come back. That was an awful thing, Back then, we had no radios, no depth recorders, nothing. We had an old window weight for a sounding lead and a clock and compass. We were out there 3 days, probably 100 boxes of nets. We had 100 boxes of nets, and we'd lift and set around the Apostle Islands. And we'd lay, if we could get in by the islands, we'd lay there overnight. Well, I'd never do that again. At first, if we couldn't get in by the islands, we would just shut the engine off out in the middle of the lake and lay there overnight. Well, not a good idea, because many commercial fishing vessels were struck by another vessel when you don't have somebody on watch. It happened off of Milwaukee with Leif Weber, back in 1998, I believe it was. Which I have that story in the book. But at first we couldn't get in by the islands. We would just shut the engine off in the middle of the lake and lay there overnight. Then we'd wake up and start lifting at daylight the next morning. Otherwise, if we could get in between the islands, most of the time we could get into Rock or South Twin Islands and moor up for the night. Well, shit, man. The night before, it was getting late, and Everett Jensen came by. He was fishing way east of us in the old Margaret. He came by us on his way back to Port Wing. The ice had cleared out there. He stopped by us, and we were just done lifting, ready to set back. It was just getting dark, but late in the afternoon. But what a beautiful day. The sun was shining. It was warm. The lake was like glass, just shiny. I remember I took a hold of the buoy. I had all cotton sisal buoy line, no synthetic in those years. There was a lot of times I just run the buoy line on top of the roof to dry. So we sat back and told Everett that we had about 1 more day of lifting and then we'd be back. He asked if everything was all right. We said, yeah, sure, fine, it's all good. So we pulled in behind the islands that night, and it was just beautiful. But during the night, she started to blow out of the northeast. Holy Christ, did she blow. We were tied by the rocky dock there at Rock Island. We were sleeping. We had hammocks at first in the boat, but that didn't work too well, especially when it got choppy. You'd roll right out of the damn things. Then we got a rollaway bed we put in there, that we could fold up. Anyway, during the night, that dirty son of a bitch started to blow. Middle of the night to early morning. And what the hell are you gonna do? The boat was pounding up against the dock. We tried everything. And then it got to be daylight. Oh, holy Christ. Then it really whistled through the northeast. Oh shit, man. We tried to untie the boat and get away from the dock. Well, that didn't work. Then we thought, well, maybe we could run across in between the islands over to South Twin. There was a dock over there too. Maybe we could get a little more in the lee. So we ran over there first, and it was getting pretty late in the afternoon when we decided we got to do something. We can't lie here anymore. Excuse me. In between Rock Island and South Twin is only a 5 or 10 minute run. Well, we see that wasn't going to work. And then we thought, well, holy Christ, we have to get out of here. By that time, it was really starting to blow and the sea was building. Even in there, actually, there was a reef, shallow water outside of North Twin Island, And at the entrance, we knew how to get into there. Usually the shallow water will break the seas, but Christ, they came screaming right over that reef, down right through there. It was unbelievable. So then we decided we have to try to scoot down between the islands farther and around to get out of this. We went down through the little narrow passage. We never had been before. We didn't know if there was enough water, deep water, or not to get through. We whirled around down through there and we're thinking, well, what if a big heavy ice field would come down and get a hold of us? It would have dragged us right out. We would have so much, we had so much on our minds that night. He said that we couldn't sleep. He said we pulled right behind the island, right south of South Twin Island, where there was deep water right up to the beach. You could probably touch the beach and still had 15 to 20 fathom of water. So we went as far as we could and dropped anchor. It must have been such a damn steep bank, and of course with the sea, there was such a tremendous undertow all the time that our anchor would not hold. So then about 8 p.m. that night, the dirty sucker started to snow. You couldn't even see the water, I tell you, and blow. Oh my God. We never slept for 72 hours. We never shut the engine off or anything. My brother and I never said one word to each other. We knew what we had to do. We didn't have time to talk. Most of the time we had to keep the sounding lead out of the portal to keep sounding the water for depth. We knew the anchor wasn't holding when each time I dropped the sounding lead, we were getting into deeper water. We pulled up the anchor and hoped we were heading for the island. We couldn't see anything. Then during the middle of the night, she kept snowing. The water was so damn cold in that all dang wet, heavy snow. Little did we know, we didn't even know it until the next morning when it started to lighten up. And hell, it was still snowing like a bitch. Looked out of the portal. Christ, I could see the water. I said, what the hell is going on here? The heavy snow formed around the hull and the boat and kept dragging us down, pulling us under. You would not believe it. We had side doors in the stern of the RVH, one on each side, but we had to be careful to get the ice off from the hull. So that one, they got the doors open, but they had to work in tandem, because if they took too much ice off one side, she would become unstable. If we knocked her off on one side, she would roll right over, so we had to be real careful in what we did there. I mean, another full hour, we would have went right under without knowing it. I've seen so much shit that you would not believe. That's when we started breaking down. The wet, heavy snow and slush formed so thick on each side of the hull. Holy Christ, it kept sucking us down. So we were gone a whole week that time, and nobody knew where we were. It was the third day when the northeaster hit. We couldn't move, and nobody knew where we were. We had plenty of coal for the stove and plenty of fish to eat, along with potatoes and onions. So they had their glorious fish boil. But we weren't thinking about eating, so they didn't eat. All we were trying to do was survive. During the northeaster, while we were out there, Norman Jensen was at Jardine's Tavern west of Fort Wayne. He was out at the tavern that night. He walked the floor pacing all night long and kept saying, "You'll never see those guys again. There ain't no way that anybody can survive that storm. Nobody." When we finally came in by Corny must have seen us come. When we hit Fort Wayne, I think practically all of Douglas County was on the pier. They thought they were seeing a ghost ship come in. I tell you, that was a hair-raising experience. Every time I see my brother, we talk about that day. So, yeah, crazy stuff. Any questions? Yes?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the golden age of fishing is sort of passed by the time this had happened. So when was the golden age? Like, it seems like
The heyday was, the heyday of the fishery was about 1888 to 1930.
okay.
That's when you still had a robust fishery. The stocks were, you had native species. The whitefish were always the most sought after. Even the Native Americans 3,000 years ago always fished whitefish. Easy to harvest. They would come in and spawn in shallow waters in the fall. And the Native Americans, the Anishinaabe, or the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi, and the Menominee, would always set up, they make gill nets out of just bark. They'd peel the bark, and then the women would make these little gill nets, or they would spear them. They'd be in birch bark canoes. They put a lantern on top of the boat for the canoe, and they would spear them. So they've always been, the whitefish have, to this day, are still. I think most of you have had whitefish, right? Just, it's good. I will still eat whitefish. I don't like trout. I like salmon, but very rarely. I should eat more fish, so that's what my wife says. Yes.
The opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway with the ocean bearing ships coming through,
Yeah,
that changed.
Yeah, with the Erie Canal and the Wheeling Canal, that not only opened up settlers coming in, but it opened the gateways to invasive species. You think the ones we most know about are the smelt. They came in 19, but they were accidentally planted as a shad. But the smelt were very aggressive. They fed on a lot of the perch fry and the herring fry. So the smelt pretty much decimated the herring and dropped the perch down to, maybe 2,000 pounds left in the lake at one time. So then in the 1940s came the I'm drawing a blank. There you go, the ones that the mass die-offs, and because they're ocean fish and their livers, they couldn't assimilate. A lot of them couldn't assimilate to the fresh water, and there would be mass die-offs. And I grew up on Washington in the 70s in June and July, hundreds of them on the beach, rotting and stinking. So, but they did. Some of the commercial fishermen would fish for them for cat food, mink food. There was a market for them.
Could you explain, maybe everybody else knows, but how do you actually put, they go out lots of miles and they drop nets and leave them and come back?
Yes, so there was gill nets, which are pretty common. I wish I had my PowerPoint, I could do that, but a gill net is, excuse me, they have many gangs of nets that are long, like a tennis net, right? They would, on the top of the net would be the buoys, and on the bottom would be the legs, so they would stand like a fence in the water, and the fish would swim into them and get ensnared into them. And these could be, excuse me, a couple thousand feet long, multiple gangs of nets. So they would set them, and then they'd come back 2-3 days later, and they'd put them into this net roller or lifter, and then they would reel the nets in, and they would pick the fishermen stand at a sorting table in the front of the boat. There'd be 2-3 men in the lifter, and the lifter would bring the nets in, and then they would pick the fish out of the nets, throw them in a bin. And this could go on for a couple hours, if you have a couple gang of nets. And gill nets are still used today. There was the pond nets and the trap nets. Pond net was just a big net set on poles where the fish would follow a lead, go into a little tunnel, and get trapped into this pond net. And the fishermen would bring their boats in, and they would lift this pond net, and gather all the fish on one side, and they'd scoop them out. And that's the least detrimental to the harvesting fish. I have, in my first book, I have all the different fishing boats, the evolution of the boats, the different types of nets, and how they fish for them. But, so that is a pond net. So you can see on the screen, you can see the poles here, and that would carry the net here. So on the one side would be a long lead net that would be maybe 700 feet. The fish would follow that lead net, get into the heart, and then get caught into this bag or this pond net. And pond net is short for impoundment gear, so they would bring the boat in, and they would start pulling the net and gather all the fish to one end. And now you can see the fishermen, they would just literally, this is a gap hook to pull the net up. But you can see all the fish in here, maybe a couple thousand. Yeah, maybe not that many, but quite a few. But you can see them all through here. That's all, that could be herring, could be whitefish. But then they would take the nets and scoop them out and put them in the bins. And throw out the ones that were, if they got a Yeah, the
They
pond
can
has,
find their buoys,
yeah.
and do they ever, make a mistake and take someone else's fish?
Well, it's not a mistake. It is, yeah, sometimes it would, there was a lot of things that happened out there. There's a lot of competition. There was gunfights, battles out there, you know, sometimes it was a wild, wild west out there, especially with the Conservation Commission. I'll read a story about that, about a warden chasing down a fisherman on Washington Island. And also, I gotta finish, I think the last story I'll read is called Seasick on Miss Judy, about a reporter from Door County who was adamant on going out. As the networks from New York were coming here doing kind of a little documentary on the commercial fishing. It's a funny story. But this one's called Hot Pursuit. This was told to me by my cousin Jake Ellison. And, oops, I think I passed it up here. So yeah, it was, the heyday was, you know, from late 1800s. So commercial fishing really began about 1840s, but it was a slow growth as more immigrants were coming in. But the fishery was always the most lucrative. Even during the Depression, both my great-grandparents, they fared very well through the Depression because fish were such high demand. They were the first ones to have vehicles on Washington Island, so they made a lot of money. But you know, but it was a gamble. You also could lose everything too. You know, the fish were in decline, or you know, in the 80s, the 70s, and 80s, the fishermen were at the mercy of the DNR and the quotas. So if you were a small-time fisherman, you were kind of posted out of the business, you know. So it was very controversial, and it was sad to see a lot of the fishermen, you know, lose their livelihood. And you know, talking to the fishermen, you know, and that's all they knew, you know, and they, you know, it was sad to see that happen. So this next story is about two Washington Island fishermen who were fishing east of Washington Island and were almost confronted by the Conservation Commission wardens. With a boat full of chubs, some were undersized, they didn't want anything to do with the patrol boat and possibly being boarded. They decided to hightail it back to Jackson Harbor. Jake Ellison told the story in his eloquent way, and I just titled it Hot Pursuit. In the late 1940s, possibly early 1950s, Ben Johnson and Fritz Bjarnson were fishing out by the shoals for chubs. Well, at that time, the chubs were so small so you could hardly catch anything with a legal net mesh size, which was 2.5 inches in 1938. Most fishermen were using 2 3/8 inch mesh, standard measure, so of course, the guys cut the mesh size down and you could get good fishing. Well, Conservation Commission was very alarmed about that. It really didn't make a lot of difference because the market controlled the whole thing anyway. But they thought they really had to put the kibosh to that, the illegal mesh sizes. So Ben and Fritz had a small gang, short gang of these small mesh gill nets. They were lifting outside the shoal. They got done lifting and they were on their way home, and there's the Conservation Commission's patrol boat, the Barney Devine coming. So Conservation Warden Donald Ewers was a pretty sticky guy, and any of those smaller mesh nets, he was going to make us suffer. So of course, Ben and Fritz headed for the cut outside of Jackson Harbor on the Barney Devine. Now the cut, there's a reef from Washington Island to Rock Island. It's pretty shallow. But back in the 30s, I think it was the Army Corps of Engineer, they made just kind of a small channel in there. They called it the cut, so a boat could get through. It was deep enough. So the fishermen called it the cut. So they got heading for the cut, and the Barney Devine was right on their heels, sucking their wake. Now, of course, once you get inside the cut, there's another little reef right in front of you towards Rock Island Bluff. Normally, you get inside the cut and you horseshoe around it. But Ben knew that if he eased off the throttle and threw the clutch off, the stern would come up about a foot out of the water, and a foot and a half, and it would float right across that reef. So there's the Barney Devine, being a deeper draft boat, probably a foot or so deeper than the Osprey. She wasn't going to float across that reef. Ben kept the power on full speed right until he got the bow to the reef, checked it down, took the clutch off and floated. She had enough headway to slide right over the reef. The Barney Devine and her skipper, however, were not so privy to that and hit the reef, scraping and grinding to a halt. Consequently, it took them 4 hours to get out of there. By the time the Osprey is back in Jackson Harbor and Ben and Fritz got their fish packed and their nets all hidden away. And this is a cute little story. Jake Ellison told this to me. He says, my uncle Bert Honeycooper fished with my dad in the 1930s. Bert didn't stand the weather too well, and of course that little boat, I think it was the worst rolling boat. It was called the Ken Jacob on the island. It rolled like a basket in any little sea. Well, she was doing her normal thing, rolling in the sea, and Bert got sick. And he had false teeth. Well, he got sick and everything went over the side, including his teeth. So of course, he went to the dentist and bought a new set of false teeth. A couple of months later, did they get those darn teeth in the nets? There's a story you can sink your teeth into, huh? Yeah. Well, since I'm back here on Humor on the High Seas, I'm going to read that. It's called Seasick on the Miss Judy. What time is it? 8:30? This might have to be the last story. Holy smokes, we'd be here till midnight. All right, this will be the last one. In 1976, this is Elaine Jensen telling me this story. In 1976, I contacted the Today Show. The roving reporter at the time was a man by the name of Cunningham. I told him about the conflict that was going on in Michigan and Wisconsin, and that the commercial fishing was the first industry up here, along with lumbering and farming. He asked if he could orchestrate something for them, and they would come up and do an interview with some of the fisheries up here. They made a date to come up, so I got all the fishermen together, and then I called Steve Ellison and asked him if there was some way to take the Miss Judy, that was the name of the boat, and set nets off the island, and set them so that no matter what the weather was that day, you could be in the lee of the wind. Well, sure, he said, I can do that, Elaine. So they came up that one day and interviewed us. I was called Sissy of the Fishery. Can you beat that? They interviewed a lot of the guys. Then I said, I got it set up for the island. They're going to lift some gill nets for you. He thought that was great. I said, one thing, we'll go along with anything you want, but we have a local reporter here by the name of Keita Steves, who writes for the Door County Advocate. Would love to go along. She's been after me and just crazy to go along with you guys. He said, oh gosh, I don't know if we can do that. I said, well, we sure would appreciate it. We have a local reporter who would love to write up the story. How often do we get the Today Show up here? He agreed to let her go along. So I went down that morning and the boat came in, and here comes Keita. She was dressed to kill. She had this wig and long white gloves. Keita thought she was really going to impress these New Yorkers. She went down to the gangplank and got aboard the Miss Judy, and away they went to the island. On Washington Island, they went all out for the evening. They were catered to by some of the islanders. They smoked fish, they fried fish, they boiled fish, every imaginable way they could serve fish, and they had it, along with beer and bitters. Bitters. You guys know about the bitters. I started drinking bitters at the age of 4. It's an elixir. They filled Keita up pretty good on fish, beer, and bitters. Then Steve said at 6 a.m. in the morning, we're getting up and we're going fishing. So I told Steve before, and Elaine was telling me this, I told Steve, when you get back to the island, call me right off the bat and let me know what happened and how it went. It was a tough time for me waiting for that call. He finally called and said everything went well lifting. He said he had lifted on the lee side of the island. There was a swell, but it was okay, except we had one person who wasn't doing so well. I said, well, what happens? Steve said, well, the first thing, there came Keita down to the boat with her white pumps on, a white wavy chiffon dress, and white gloves clear up to her elbows, and a great big hat on. He said, we get north of the island, there was just a dead swell, Steve said. You couldn't get away from it. Keita was down there by the lifter, Steve said, Keita, you just have to go someplace else. You're right in the way. Go up in the bow. He had put a couple of clean boards across there. He said, go up there and sit. You'll be out of the way of us lifting. All right, she said. Keita went up and sat on a little plank that ran across the bow. Then got out to the buoy, as he said, they got out to the buoy and started to lift. They had probably lifted a half of a box when Steve kind of caught Keita out of the corner of his eye and could see her color was changing and her big hat was starting to tilt. So anyway, Steve was clearing nets and he turned around and looked up in the bow of the boat and there's Keita. She's ready to throw up. She's not going to make it. Steve said, Keita, Steve, don't you throw up in my boat. He said that old wig came around and was twisted so you could see about 1 eye and a half. Steve said, Keita looked at me with that 1 eye and she immediately took off one glove and here it came. He said she vomited and filled the glove right up. There was a portal nearby. She got that damn thing open and threw the glove out the portal. There it went by, that white glove. Steve said, we continued to lift, and when we got on the last box, I looked back at her, and she was really green, and a little white around the eyes. He said that wig had almost covered her entire face, so just part of 1 eye was showing. It took 3 guys to get her off the boat that day. There you go. There's your story. More than happy to. I usually sell these for 30. I'm selling them for 20. This is the last printing, so I got a few left. If you'd like some, honor the fishermen. We'd appreciate it.